Hi everybody, this is Nancy at Paper Moon Tarot. I wanted to do a little video looking at guidebooks for tarot decks. We hear a lot when people do walkthroughs of decks, they pull out the book, they say, looks like a good book, they tell you there's a table of contents, an introduction to tarot, some spreads, the explanations of the cards. Maybe they call out a special element like journal prompts or something like that. But it's usually a very quick overview of a book, and maybe they'll read a selection from it while they're going through the cards. But I think we kind of don't have a focus on the guidebooks. Part of that, I'm sure, is because you don't buy the guidebook usually. You buy the deck and it comes with a guidebook, so you can't study the guidebook too much ahead of time. And you usually, if you really love a deck, you'll deal with the deck and buy another book. You have tarot books that you can read up on the tarot, and if the guidebook is not that great, it's okay. But I just kind of felt like it would be interesting to look at the variety of guidebooks and kind of have an overview of how to analyze what makes a good guidebook, so that when you do open a deck and you pull out the guidebook, you know what to look for and what might be different and an interesting feature of a book that other books don't have. I worked in publishing for many years. I was also a freelance writer for many years and a consultant to publishing companies. So I kind of know what I'm talking about when it comes to books. I have worked on creating new book series and work with designers and editors, as well as being a writer myself. So I just thought I'd take that background and look at guidebooks and talk about what you should look for when you get a guidebook that can help you decide whether you spend a lot of time with it or you just put it aside. I'm not going to look at little white books, the really little ones today, but I will look at some. For example, this one is a little smaller. This one is bigger. So I'll look at a few different sizes, but mainly I want to focus on the features of books that have a little more meat to them than the little flip through tiny pamphlets. So with that in mind, I want to start by saying I think there are three things you should consider when you're thinking about analyzing how good a guidebook is, or what to look for in a good guidebook. The three things would be design, usability, and content. So design is probably one of the more obvious things. One of the first things that you look at, and what people who review decks often say is, well, it's black and white, as the Animal Totem guidebook is. It shows images of the card, but they're in black and white. Or it's color, meaning there is some color in it, and usually a color representation of the cards. So that's one of the things that jumps out at you right away. And I'm sure most people look for that and consider that color is nice to have, but it's not necessarily the be-all and end-all, and it does depend on the deck. The Animal Totem deck shows nice big images of cards that are color cards. But if you look at something like the Wild Unknown, that has black and white images of cards that are mainly black and white. There's a little bit of color in some of them, but mainly they're black and white. So wasting money, yours and the artist's, on producing color in the book doesn't make a lot of sense if the cards don't have a lot of color. Certainly having images of the cards is really important, I think, for tarot guidebooks, because you don't want to have to find the card every time you flip through to look at a meaning. You've got a representation right there. But anyway, color or black and white is one thing to look for. Now, I will note that there are some publishers who use a very clever trick of using a single color. Get that to focus. And this is the Wildwood Tarot guidebook. They use a single color, but it's not black on white pages. They use in this case, blue. There's sort of a deep blue color that they use. Here they've got reverse text that's white against the dark blue. Here they've got the lighter blue and the images produced in that blue. And all the text is this blue. It just adds a little spark to it. Not black and white, but a color. It could be a green, could be a blue. But you see the blue saturated in different ways so that you can have both a dark color and a light color, and the images represented in the color. And you can see in this wheel, you've got all various shades of this. Sometimes feels gray, sometimes feels blue, sometimes almost seems like there's black text, but it just adds some pizzazz, but it's simply one color. And that's kind of a nice trick to use. So that's black and white versus color in the book. Again, if it's a black and white deck, I wouldn't worry about getting color in your guidebook. It's not that important. I mentioned the use of card images. I think it's vital with guidebooks for tarot decks. Now let's look for a second at the page layout. Some books are pretty straightforward. This Animal Totem Tarot is pretty straightforward, sort of like a novel. You know, there are some headings and so on, but there isn't a whole lot going on with the page design, the way the page is laid out. Same thing for the Wildwood Tarot. It's pretty much straight text, just like a nonfiction book you might read. This one doesn't even have, well, it has headings, but they're just full caps here. But there's not much going on design-wise on the pages. Then you have other books that use a little variety on the page layout. This one for Shadowlands has this sort of yellow design here. It has this little element that gives you the page number. It has nice headings and the card image. The layout is just a little more interesting, some bulleted lists. I mean, a bullet list may not seem sexy to you, but to break up the text of a book, having headings and bullet lists and called out text like a quote or something like that helps the reader not to be bored to tears. So look for something like that in books. The Tarot of the Divine, I'll get to focus, has a little different page layout where you've got a couple cards on each page, and it just doesn't want to focus. So it adds some variety to other book design. And one that I absolutely love is the Tattoo Tarot, the 8 Coins Tattoo Tarot. It has a fascinating layout, which I'll talk about in more detail shortly. But it uses color, it uses font nicely, a nice font in it. It's just a beautiful little book, and the pages are nicely laid out. So look for the page design. It can add interest if you're trying to slog through a 200 or 300 page guidebook. It's more fun with a nice layout. And I mentioned briefly the font. Again, you've got very traditional font in a book like this from the Animal Totem Tarot. And you have a different kind of font here called a sans serif font. So it's simpler, more modern looking. And again, I'll try and see the difference between that and this, which looks more like a business letter type font, a Times New Roman or something like that. So font can also make some difference in reading the books. Now, some, not many, but some like the Wild Unknown have a font that looks like handwriting. It works fine in this guidebook because the descriptions are brief. If you had to read 300 pages of this type of text in this font, it would drive you crazy, trust me. So judicious use of font is important. This is fun with brief text, and it doesn't work so well with lengthy text. So the font can be important. Again, it's just a readability kind of thing and a keeping your interest kind of thing, to be honest with you. Last thing in design is the cover. You can have soft covers, which most guidebooks for tarot decks are. They're paperbacks. You can have a hard cover. The Wild Unknown has a harder, you can hear it, it's a hardcover. Not a hardback book type of cover, but a flexible hardback. And that is pretty darn rare, is what I found. You can find some books, booklets that have hard covers. I have this one, and I'm forgetting the other one, but I have like 2 out of 150 decks. I have 2 that came with hardcover guidebooks. So, I think it's the Witch's Wisdom has, again, a flexible hardcover. So that's up to you. If you find it's a great guidebook and you want to use it again and again, the hardcover is going to make it last longer, but it's real hard for you to choose a tarot deck based on it having a hardcover guidebook, because most of them don't. Okay, so that's design, just page layout, font, colors, cover, that kind of thing. The next thing, the next category is usability. And by that, I mean, how easy is the book to use in terms of finding the information you need? Because that's what a book is all about. It's supposed to help you find what you're looking for. Now, most guidebooks, if they're of any length, have a table of contents. Table of contents is one of the tools that book designers use to help people find what they need. Another device for that is an index, but you don't find indexes in tarot guidebooks that I've seen. And that's probably because the majority of the book is the cards themselves, the list of cards. And the table of contents and flipping through in order is going to give you access to the cards and their locations pretty darn well. You don't need an index that says 4 of cups, 3 of cups, 2 of cups with page numbers. So not with a guidebook. Now, if you're buying a book on tarot, I'd recommend you find one with a really good index. So you can find information about how to use the tarot and the history of the tarot and so forth pretty easily. A good table of contents and a good index are a sign of a really good book. When I worked in publishing, I worked in mainly nonfiction publishing, and our rule of thumb was that a good index should be about 10% of the page count. So if you had a 300-page book, you had a 30-page index. Again, it would be a waste to put 30 pages of index in one of these guidebooks. But if you do buy a general tarot book, look for a good index. That's my side tip. Okay, another thing about usability is finding elements like tabs. Now, in this Tattoo Tarot book, which is a lovely little book, you have a few different things to help you find what you need. One is that, sort of like a dictionary, you can see the white sections on the side, and each of those is a suit. So if you want the cups, and you kind of roughly know the order, you want the swords, you want to go to the swords, you want to go to the pentacles, you have these little colored tabs that you can use to do that. But something else in this book that is rather unique and I think wonderful is that you have basically tabs on the side of the page. This tells you where you are. You're looking at the major arcana, and when you flip, and go into something else, you know, you're now looking at the minor arcana. And so you get a great little visual clue as to where you are in the book and how to find things. Again, you don't see that on very many books, but you do see it on some of them. And so treasure that when you find it, because especially if it's a thicker book, it's a nice help to get you to flip through, because tarot guidebooks, after all, may be something you read, but they're also a reference. You go and grab them when you want to read more about the Ten of Swords. And being able to find that quickly and easily is really important to usability. Now, if you hardly ever use the guidebook, you put it away on a shelf and never use it, then you don't need all these bells and whistles. So the other thing about usability is binding. Going back to this one, which I like as a book, it's so tightly bound and such a small book that I find it hard to even open it so that I can read all the text. It's so tight. That's pretty much the case in most of the books. The bigger the page and the more they give you a gutter here, an offset margin, the better you can read everything by just holding it open. I will say that the ideal book is one that has what's called perfect binding. And I'm pulling out a textbook I helped write here to show you what perfect binding is. You'll find it on most textbooks, where you can lay it flat and it stays open. It's called perfect binding or lay flat binding. I have never seen a tarot guidebook like that. But once again, if you're looking at a tarot book, you buy a book in the store on tarot, looking for the lay flat binding is a good idea. So you can read it without having to hold it open like you do with most guidebooks, where you're having to, sorry, I keep hitting the camera. You're having to do this because if you lay it down, it's going to close. So the other usability factor may be that you'll find a book with multiple languages. And that's strictly a practical usability feature if you speak a different language than the guidebook is mainly written in. If it adds other languages and one of those is yours, then that's helping your usability. Obviously, you can read the book. So that's usability. Contents is probably where most people say, this is a great guidebook. They're not talking about the binding. They're not talking about the font or the page layout. They're talking about the fact that when they read a description of a card, for example, it's lyrical, it's pleasant to read, just like reading a good writer in a novel. It gives them the kind of information that they want, whatever that may be. So let's quickly go through contents. Generally, you get a table of contents, and you need it. You should have a table of contents to help you find things in the book. So that's one thing. You may get a history of tarot or a foreword, or this one has a foreword and a preface and an introduction. And then it goes into this deck, which happens to be based on shadow work. But a TOC, some sort of introduction, which may give you something about the history of tarot, if you've never used tarot. Most of them just kind of have to include that in case you're someone and this is your first deck and you don't know anything about how to use it. You will also get maybe some information on choosing a deck, or why this deck kind of thing. You might get an artist statement on the approach of the book. Why is this book based on animals? This one has something about power animals and animal guides and totems and animal archetypes. So it tells you why the animal totem tarot is based on animals. And that may include an artist statement. why did I choose this art? Why did I do the art in this way? I think a lot of people whose reviews I listen to feel that an artist's statement and an artist's description in the cards about what's being shown and why they chose that and how it represents the card is really important. If it's not a pretty close clone to something like Rider-Waite-Smith or Thoth, then you want to know what that image is, why it is represented that way to help your understanding of the deck. You may have something in the book about, how you greet your deck, how you cleanse your deck, how you shuffle or interview your deck, how to care for your deck. If you're an experienced tarot reader, those things may or may not be of any use to you, but again, they're in there for the newer reader, and really it's up to you how much of that you do. There may be something in there about how to read tarot, how to read the cards. Again, for the newer user, that's very helpful. And then in this one, exploring your deck, the different cards and so forth is at the back of the book. And then many books have spreads. Let's look at the Shadowlands. Just trying to find some interesting spreads here. Okay. Shadowlands has some spreads as well as some advice on creating your own spreads. So that's kind of nice. You also, obviously, after you get this pre-information, or sometimes in the back of the book, you'll have information about spreads. The meat of the book is where you're talking about the cards themselves. For that, you typically get a card image, which, as I mentioned, is very important. You will potentially get keywords, like here. Just a list of words that are quick hit on what the card's meaning is, what it can represent. You will probably get upright and reversed meanings. Now, in the case of this deck, you have the card meaning, and then you have shadow meanings, which is the reversed meaning, basically. I'm just going to grab another one so we get some variety here. In this book, which is for the 78 Tarot Carnival, which is 78 different artists, the focus is very much on the art. So you do have some keywords up here, but then you have an artist statement and the card meaning. Sometimes the card meaning has information about reversals, and sometimes it doesn't. Again, this has that artist statement, so that describes the art in a lot of detail in the voice of the artist, which in a deck that has art by several different people is really invaluable for you to understand what's going on. Some of the things I like in a guidebook are things like journal prompts, how the card is used in a reading, for example. So you might have a prompt on what to write in your journal, a question about the card that you can meditate on and make a note in your journal. You might also have something like the Animal Totem Tarot gives you, which is what this card means in different kinds of readings. If it's business and career, family and relationships, health and well-being, those three topics may give you a different feel for this card. The card may mean some different things depending on that. And here you have card of the day journal prompts. So if you pull a card of the day, you can go through these questions. And one nice feature of this guidebook, which is a very good guidebook, by the way, is that you have space to make notes. So you could use this guidebook as your journal. When you're starting to use tarot, this makes a wonderful deck because the deck is simple. It's an RWS clone. And the guidebook gives you information about the card as well as what it means in the readings and prompts. It also has something which you'll see in many books, a quote. And quotes, again, they break up the text, they give you something different to look at, they give you sort of a perspective on the card that may be different from the author's. So I think quotes are a really good idea to break things up and give you something different. You might also have a book that lists things like astrological associations or esoteric, Kabbalah, things like that. It might have exercises or activities, the space for notes that I pointed out, or a poem. So all those things will keep your interest in the book. You might look at it and say it's got pretty color, it's got nice page layout, and I want to read this whole thing, and then get partway into it and find the writing style doesn't appeal to you, or you need more. You find features like exercises or tarot journal prompts that really pull you in and get you through the book and have you really read through the book more than just looking up card meanings now and then. So that's just sort of a deep dive into what tarot guidebooks offer, some of the things to be aware of and look for and appreciate. Just, spend a little more time with your guidebook next time. If it's at all substantial, you might find things in there that are real gems that help you with your tarot. So that's all I have for today. Let me know if you found this useful, and subscribe if you like. That would be lovely. And like the video. All good stuff. Thanks for joining me, and take care.